Inflation is what occurs when you put a lot of money into the hands of consumers. There'll have to be some sort of repercussion down the road. They're still spending like crazy. All you're doing is devaluing the dollar. I saw somebody the other day on Twitter talking about the level of debt in the US, and it is definitely way higher than it should be. If you look at the last 40 years, we've only run a surplus in 2 out of the last 40 years. Might be 41 years now. And those 2 years were in the late 90s when tax revenue surged because the economy saw a major economic expansion. We saw 8% GDP growth in a country like the US, which was the strongest in the world. Now, this video is not meant to put any fear. It's meant to talk about the reality of what these things mean. Whenever you have a country operating on a lot of deficits, you hear arguments on both sides. One side, the people who believe in what's called modern monetary theory, say it doesn't matter. Run deficits, it's okay. To which then the normal response we always say is, well, then why charge taxes? Just print money like crazy. If you print money like crazy, put it in people's hands, it doesn't matter. Don't charge taxes. Just if you want to spend 10 trillion a year, just print it. Let everybody keep their money. Their argument is, well, taxes kind of give a value to money. No, it doesn't. You don't need taxes to put value on money. And now we've seen that inflation is what occurs when you put a lot of money into the hands of consumers. And again, I'm not a believer that inflation is a bad thing. Nothing in and of itself is a bad thing. I do want you to realize, though, that over time, the more and more debt we have, there'll have to be some sort of repercussion down the road. If we keep operating on deficits, and deficits means basically your losses every year. They bring in $7 trillion in tax revenue, they spend $8 trillion, that's $1 trillion deficit. As you add more and more deficits to the debt, because you have to borrow that money in some way, all you're doing is devaluing the dollar. And when you devalue the dollar, that's what's called inflation. Okay? Now, are there ways around this? Well, yes, but it requires us to be a little bit different in the way we operate our country. At the end of the day, the only way to reduce a deficit is one of 3 ways. Increase receipts, which means increase taxes, decrease spending, or a combination of both. Now, when you look at the way the arguments are made, when it comes to increasing taxes, who's it going to be increased on? You know, we look at California. And the reason I bring up California is for years and years and years, my family in California said, Paul, you got to move out here. So the taxes are too high. Paul, who cares about the taxes? Well, suddenly, all of a sudden, a lot of people are caring about the taxes and the cost of living. And you sit there and look out there and say, okay, will it be okay? Well, it's fine for now, but at some point, there's a thing called the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve is very simple. If your tax rate is 0, this is your tax rate, and this is your tax revenue. This is the Laffer curve. At 0% rate, you collect 0 revenue. At 100% rate, you collect 0 revenue. Why? Because nobody has an incentive to work anymore. If you're going to tax me 100%, like our friend Bernie Sanders says, on every dollar above $1 billion, then why would anybody even try to grow their business? There's no reason to. You have to give people incentives. And when you look at a place like California, and their taxes are going higher and higher, they're eventually going to start losing more and more wealthy people. At some point, they're going to get better options somewhere else. And they're moving to Arizona, Nevada, and Texas mostly. Why? Nevada and Texas have no state income tax. I don't know what Arizona's is, but they're same kind of living, same kind of similar weather-ish, and they're able to save on those taxes. Now, when it comes to spending, well, what's California doing now? They're still spending like crazy. And again, if revenue goes down and spending goes up, you're going to have problems. For the US, you know, Berkshire Hathaway had their meeting this weekend, and both Munger and Buffett were talking about how great the US will be forever. Well, I do believe the US is still, I don't buy into the whole, well, we're not the fastest growing country in the world anymore, therefore we suck. No, we're still awesome. And we're awesome because we were the fastest growing country for a long time, and we grew so economically powerful that it's hard to turn a really big ship a couple degrees to the left. It's very, very difficult. If you're in a jet ski, I can turn around in 2 seconds. If you're a very big ship, it takes a long time to turn around or to shift even 10 degrees. And that's the way I want you to look at it. The US isn't worse because we're not going to grow like India, China, and Africa. No, it's just the reality of it. And someday, when those countries have the same economic per person income that we do, they will have the same issues. We hear a lot of FUD about not being the reserve currency anymore. Warren Buffett doesn't believe that's ever going to happen. Well, I wouldn't agree with Warren Buffett on that, but guess what? I don't care. I don't care if we lose the reserve currency. I really don't. Countries in the past have lost the reserve currency and they still did just fine. Look at Great Britain. Is Great Britain a terrible economic country? Absolutely not. But I repeat over and over, there's still going to be some come to Jesus moment where we have to realize that we cannot continue to spend like this and not expect inflation at some point. You know, back in 2008, I was completely wrong. I thought, okay, we're printing all this money, it's going to lead to inflation. We saw like no inflation for 12 years. Why? Well, one argument could be that we would have had deflation if it wasn't for that. Maybe. So even having a little bit of inflation was still inflationary compared to deflation. Or second, which I believe more is, we didn't put the money in the hands of the people. We put it in the hands of the banks. And what are banks going to do? They were just using it to stockpile their balance sheets. Is that right? I don't know, but it makes a lot of sense. Because the second we put money into people's hands in 2020, what happened? Nobody wanted to have a certain, like, hey, the government's paying me $600 a week. I'm not going to get a job for $15 an hour. Why? They're giving me $600 a week. I don't need to do that. That's inflation, right? Telling me you need to pay me more for me to get off my couch and go do work because the government's giving me money. Now, keep in mind, guys, I'm a proponent of universal basic income. Milton Friedman, a great libertarian, was a believer in universal basic income, which is basically a minimum amount of money paid to everybody, no matter what your income level, but with a flat tax involved and curtailed spending. That's the big thing. The spending is getting out of hand. Now, people sit there and say, oh, we don't have a fair tax policy. Yeah, we do. Yes, we do. It's actually unfair to certain people. That is not a popular viewpoint right now. But when you're making $1 and half of it goes to the US government in some way, shape, or form, plus all the other taxes you pay along the way with sales tax and everything, give me a break when you're paying 60 to 70% of your income in taxes in some way, shape, or form. Come on. At some point, the spending has to stop, right? Because if we keep spending, that's what's going to keep justifying raising taxes. That's going to keep justifying deficit spending. And at some point, we have to realize that there will be an issue with that. Look at Japan. Now, I'm not saying we're going to become Japan. I don't know what we're going to become. But look at Japan. They spent like crazy. They had big time debt, and Japan has grown zero. Now, they have other issues. They have an aging population, not much growth in terms of the number of people living there. There's an issue there. There's a labor supply issue there. And Japan's GDP is actually down, I think, from 20 years ago. Down. Not real GDP. Actual GDP is down, I believe. I haven't verified that. I haven't looked at that in a while, so I don't know if my memory is serving me correctly. But there's no economic growth there overall. Are we going to end up like that? I don't know. Now, remember, I'm not saying this to put fear in anybody's mind. What I'm saying is, guys, every time we do an action, there will be a reaction. The reaction is usually not one domino. It's usually multiple dominoes down the road. Just like when you buy an investment. If you overpay, you might be able to get away with it for a while, but eventually if you keep doing that, you will come to a point where you're going to pay for those mistakes. We've gotten away with deficit spending for so long that we've forgotten all about it. And by the way, both sides are equally at fault about this. Both sides are equally at fault. So I want to remind everybody that when you're ready to blame the other side, just remember your side has been doing just as much. When they're in power, they spend just as much and they incur just as much deficits as the other side. I don't care what it is. I don't care what it is. Even for the people in power right now, the Biden administration isn't doing much different than what Trump did. I don't want to hear any other way about it. And when Trump was in power, he was doing no different than what Obama did. These are the things you have to remember. That the world, this is one thing, I used to be a very black or white person. And now I've realized there's a lot of gray in there. And it becomes a lot easier to sit there and say, okay, well, what does this mean for the future? Well, guys, let's go to an extreme. Back in 2000, I remember graduating high school in 99 and being told the college education was the most important thing, take on your debt. And now what do we hear? We hear the exact opposite. Don't take on $100,000, $150,000 in debt. It's not worth it. Yeah, I agree. Now I'm saying things like everybody shouldn't go to college. I've been saying that for 15 years, though. I don't think everybody should go to college. I think vocational school is a wonderful route for a lot of people. We shouldn't education slam people because they don't want to get a college degree or a master's degree. But that was a bubble that happened. Remember the other bubble? Owning a home is the most important American dream. Okay, everybody did that to an extreme, and guess what happened? We have to live within a reality. And the reality means that if we do something over and over and over again that has small consequences, over time it'll lead to bad things. It'll lead to worse things. That's the point I'm trying to make. Another extreme example when it comes, and I've talked about this with income taxes, and I'm not saying this is a slam on income taxes, even though I do slam income taxes, but just to show the marginal changes. Back in 1913, the first income tax was 7% on every dollar above what would today be $11 million in today's dollars. How did we go from 7% on every dollar above 11 million essentially to now we're at 39% on every dollar above 300 or 400,000? I don't know the exact highest marginal bracket because of little changes over time. And that's the same thing that happens with debt. Now, what I'd like to see happen is, personally, I'd love to have it where Congress is incentivized to get a balanced budget and a surplus. That's what should happen. Give them an incentive to do so. Because right now, their incentive is give as much as I can to my constituents, somebody else will pay for it, and I'll be a hero. That's their incentive. But if you give them personally an incentive, let me go to extreme. All right, guys, you guys don't get paid, or what Warren Buffett says, you can't run for re-election if there's a debt. I say shut down the government, and you guys get paid based on there being a surplus. I really truly believe that. Now both sides will have to come to agreement at some point. Just like we're doing the debt. I love this debt ceiling talk. Every couple of years, every year, we have a debt ceiling talk. Oh, if we default, it's like, okay, I'm not worried. I have 90-day treasuries. I have 90-day treasuries. Now, I believe I'm reading some things where we have defaulted before on our debts. I don't think we've ever defaulted on treasuries. I'm not 100% sure. We've defaulted on other things that are equivalents of some sort back in the day. Or in the Nixon years, we defaulted on some sort of gold thing. I don't really know exactly. But guys, I'm really not worried if the U.S. government defaults on these things, because I don't think it's ever going to happen. Because I think at the end of the day, we're just going to do one thing and one thing only. Make that printing machine happen. So guys, if this makes sense to you, or at least a way of thinking about something, 2 things I need you to do for me. Subscribe to the channel and share this with somebody else. And I know it's easy for me to sit there and say this from my but guys, at the end of the day, every decision you make is compounding on itself. And that's no different for us versus the government. But just know, my parents are immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I was born in the Middle East. You ask me right now, what country you want to live in this world? And it's the United States of America. Are there other countries out there that are probably great? Probably. Absolutely. But United States of America, I could live anywhere I want to live. I have homes in other areas of the world. I choose to live in the United States of America, and I'm still bullish on that. Thanks very much, guys. Take care.